Hey everyone, and welcome back to another Explainer. Today, we're diving into something that happened back in the spring of 1985. It's an event that marketing historians still refer to as literally the most spectacular, self-inflicted wound in commercial history. And the crazy part? It wasn't a massive data breach, it wasn't some huge financial fraud, it was, incredibly enough, a simple chemical change. We're talking about the epic saga of New Coke, and we're going to look at how what should have been a standard business pivot turned into a real-life corporate crime story.
So I really want you to ponder a mystery with me for a second. Think about this. Why on earth would a room full of the smartest, highest-paid executives on the planet look at a 99-year-old, deeply beloved formula, which, by the way, was the absolute most successful product in human history, and intentionally decide to just trash it? I mean, it sounds like absolute madness, right? Well, it turns out the answer isn't just basic corporate stupidity. As we're going to see, it's actually this gripping story of psychological warfare, a blind taste test that broke the human brain, and a massive fatal misunderstanding of why we actually buy the things we buy.
The stakes of this whole narrative really peaked on April 23, 1985. The executives down in Atlanta did the unthinkable. They took their top-secret formula, famously known as Merchandise 7X, tossed it out, and replaced it with a sweeter, smoother version they called New Coke. Now, this one single chemical tweak triggered an unbelievable chain reaction. Within a matter of days, their company headquarters was flooded. Massive protests literally erupted in the streets. You guys, they even had to hire psychiatrists to analyze the grief of the entire nation.
So, let's set the stage. Section 1. An untouchable American empire.
Look, Coca-Cola obviously didn't start out as this massive global giant. It was actually invented back in 1886 by a pharmacist as a medicinal brain tonic. But watch how it evolved into something so much bigger. During World War II, the company made this bold promise. Every single American soldier would be able to buy a bottle of Coke for a nickel anywhere in the world. They literally built bottling plants right next to the front lines. So, to a lonely GI, that cold bottle wasn't just a drink, it was a physical piece of home. Fast forward to 1971 and you get the famous Hilltop commercial. You know, young people singing about peace and harmony. That ad completely cemented Coke as a symbol of nostalgia, family dinners, and holiday traditions. They weren't just a beverage company anymore. They had basically bottled American identity.
By the post-war era, Coca-Cola held a staggering 60% market share. 60%. They essentially had a total monopoly on American happiness. But you know how these stories go, monopolies almost always breed complacency. And while Coca-Cola was busy patting itself on the back for owning America's past, a really fierce, hungry predator was quietly scheming to steal America's future.
Which brings us to Section 2. The Pepsi Challenge Ambush.
For decades, Pepsi was just seen as the cheap alternative. People actually mocked it as the poor man's drink. But in the late 1960s and 70s, an executive there named John Scully realized something crucial. They were never going to beat Coke on tradition. So, they did something brilliant. They weaponized Coke's age against them. The pitch was simple. If Coke is the drink of your parents, kind of stuffy, old-fashioned conservative, well then Pepsi is the drink of the young, the rebellious, and the modern. They essentially invented the Pepsi generation.
And then they dropped a total nuclear bomb on the whole industry, the 1975 Pepsi Challenge. It was such a brilliantly simple blind taste test. They would pour both sodas into these unmarked cups at regular shopping malls, film random shoppers tasting them side by side, and then reveal that overwhelmingly, even die-hard Coke drinkers actually chose Pepsi. It was a devastating psychological assault, because it proved that when you strip away the fancy branding and all that deep nostalgia, the human tongue actually preferred the sweeter taste of Pepsi.
And the real-world impact of this? It was absolutely undeniable. Coca-Cola's market share just plummeted, dropping toward an all-time low of 24% by the early 80s, while Pepsi's share was climbing incredibly fast. You can imagine the rising panic inside the Atlanta headquarters. The Goliath of the beverage world was slowly but surely bleeding out in plain sight. Consumers were clearly shifting towards sweeter flavors, and the traditional, sharper bite of original Coke was just losing the modern palate.
Enter Section 3, Project Kansas, the flawed investigation.
So Coke's CEO Roberto Goizueta authorizes this top-secret mission to completely reinvent Coke's flavor from scratch. The goal? Make it smoother, make it sweeter, basically make it taste a lot more like Pepsi, but better. This undertaking, known as Project Kansas, became the single most expensive market research project in corporate history. We're talking a $4 million budget and blind testing the new formula on nearly 200,000 consumers. And the result? It was a landslide victory. Consumers totally preferred the new sweet formula over the original Coke, and get this, they preferred it over Pepsi too.
The executives firmly believed they had finally cracked the code. As they put it, the data was crystal clear, repeatable, and mathematically flawless. They were convinced they had built the ultimate weapon to win the cola wars. But here is the major plot twist of our story. Despite all those flawless numbers and massive budgets, the executives' data contained a fatal blind spot. It was a flaw so massive it almost defies belief.
Let's unpack that in Section 4, the sip test illusion.
So what was that fatal flaw? It was something called testing bias. You see, the human brain's reward center for sugar actually tricks us. Imagine taking just a single 1-ounce sip of an unmarked beverage. Your brain instantly responds to that immediate hit of sweetness. Because of that, the sweeter drink almost always wins in a single sip. But here's the catch. Humans don't just drink 1 ounce of soda. We drink a full 12-ounce can, or we sip on a 2-liter bottle over a whole afternoon. A drink that tastes absolutely perfect for a single sip can quickly become sickeningly sweet and cloying when you drink the whole thing. The researchers had optimized for the sip, completely ignoring real-world consumption.
But wait, there was actually an even deeper psychological mistake at play here, called the endowment effect. When researchers asked people to choose between option A or option B in those tests, they never warned the subjects that choosing the new flavor meant the permanent total destruction of the original. Remember, Coca-Cola wasn't just a flavor profile, it was a deeply ingrained anchor of personal identity. So when the CEO stood in front of the press to excitedly announce the death of the old formula, he honestly didn't realize he had just insulted the childhoods of virtually every adult in America.
And wow, did the public respond. Section 5, the nation rebels.
40,000. That is the mind-boggling number of panicked, angry calls that were flooding the Coca-Cola hotline every single day. The backlash was instantaneous, it was somewhat violent, and it was deeply, deeply emotional. The company literally had to hire extra operators just to handle citizens who were weeping and screaming on the phone. There's even this one incredible story from the hotline about an elderly woman who called in, begging the operator to tell her if they had saved any of the old formula purely because she didn't want to die without ever tasting it again. It's just wild.
The sheer scale of the chaos was completely unprecedented. People were actively protesting by pouring new Coke down city sewers in the streets. There was a guy in Seattle who spent $1,000 buying up old cans just to stockpile them in his basement like he was prepping for a nuclear fallout. Groups actually formed called the Old Cola Drinkers of America and filed literal lawsuits against the company to try and force them to release the old recipe. Consumers were treating this flavor change as a deeply personal, almost malicious insult.
And while Coca-Cola's executives were trapped in this waking nightmare, Pepsi was, of course, laughing all the way to the bank. They started taking out full-page newspaper ads that smugly said, after 87 years of going eyeball to eyeball, the other guy just blinked. Pepsi actually gave all of its employees a paid day off just to celebrate. Think about that. Coca just spent millions of dollars on data that told them everyone was going to love this product, and instead, they woke up as the single most hated corporate entity in America. But the story has one last major twist. Section 6, the triumphant blunder. Exactly 79 days after launching New Coke, Coca-Cola finally threw up the white flag. On July 11, 1985, the company issued a massive public apology and officially brought back the original formula under the name Coca-Cola Classic. Now, this humiliating retreat was such an enormous deal that it actually interrupted daytime soap operas on network television as breaking news. And over on the floor of the American Stock Exchange, stockbrokers literally stood up and physically cheered when the announcement came across the wire. The aftermath of this surrender was just unbelievable. When Coca-Cola Classic finally hit the shelves again, sales absolutely exploded. Loyalists were rushing to the stores, buying entire cases out of pure, unadulterated relief. Brand loyalty soared straight back up to 1950s levels. By the time 1985 came to a close, Coca-Cola was completely dominating Pepsi once again. That huge mistake, it actually saved the company from utter ruin.
This turnaround was so spectacular that it actually caused Wall Street analysts to start floating conspiracy theories. They were seriously asking if this whole thing was a planned, brilliantly calculated stunt just to make the public realize how much they loved the original drink.
I absolutely love how Coke's COO, Don Keough, addressed those rumors. He just flat out said, "The truth is, we are not that dumb and we are not that smart." It wasn't a master plan. It was just a colossal, data-driven human error.
So, what does this all mean for us today? It brings up a really fascinating question. Is a brand just a collection of ingredients, a price point, or a chemical formula, or is it actually a contract with the customer's soul? As we've seen, when you mess with a product that people genuinely love, you aren't just altering your inventory, you're tearing up a little piece of their lives. Coca-Cola won the Cola Wars, but not because their executives were these infallible data geniuses. They won because they had managed to create something so deeply vital to the human experience that not even their own massive blunders could kill it. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope this leaves you thinking a little bit differently about the everyday products you love.